today by saying that I'm now about to sail into uncharted waters. I believe I have, over the last many weeks, put forth and recorded the content is going to wind up in my book on marriage. Some of it was chaotic, some of it is excessive, a lot of it needs to be edited, but I have somebody to work already, taking maybe it may have been 7 episodes of this that are really the contents of the book, and it's being turned into a type manuscript. So I'll be able to play with it. I'll be able to add to it, subtract from it, reorganize it, turn it into a much closer finished product. But it was very nice having this opportunity to speak the thoughts that will wind up in that book. And so I'm going to move on from there. I have a new topic for today, and the title of this presentation, fragmented and as strange as it may be, is Comments on Seeking Psychological Help. One of the things that I get asked, and I hear other people struggling with, is should I get some kind of professional help for myself? And I'm going to make a variety of comments that occur to me when I think about that question. I'll start with something simple and annoying. Comments on seeking psychological help. What on earth is psychological help? Just laying out that sentence takes us into what I consider a big semantic mess. Clearly, the people who come to see people like me are not feeling terribly good about some things in their life. And they're hoping in a conversation or many conversations with me and with my fellow colleagues who are with me today, they have the same experience. Something will improve. The quality of their life will improve, their feeling states will improve, but they feel like they could be different, better, or somehow attending to some things in a different way, and they're unable to figure out what to do by themselves. And they think they need some kind of talking to, by, or with somebody whose profession it is trying to unkink human lives. Now, the problem is there are a variety of maps that lay out what the terrain is like and what should be the trails that are taken to get to place A and place B on those maps that we have. But I want to say again, something from semantics. The map of the terrain is not the terrain. Any map of any terrain does not lay forth all the features in that terrain. It's not always accurate, and it's a real problem. And I think in the world I occupy, it's a particularly big problem. Clearly, there is some wisdom of some kind that I possess, and my 2 colleagues that are here possess. It's not overlapping for the 3 of us. The wisdom we possess is idiosyncratic. It's composed of our own life experiences, plus whatever professional training we had while we were in graduate school, plus whatever our supervisors while we were working with clients tried to teach us, plus things we've read on our own, plus continuing education courses we have taken as a result of wanting to renew our licenses. So each one of us is a unique product. It is not one size fits all. In addition, if that weren't bad enough, in these days, before a client shows up in our office saying, could you be of help to me? He or she has often spent a lot of time reviewing keywords and phrases on the internet and trying to find some kind of his or her own wisdom about what doesn't feel quite right, what might be wrong, what is to be attended to, what kind of conversations might help. So it is not uncommon. I would say about 50% of the time, somebody who shows up in my office has tried to do their own teaching of themselves, and some kinds of research they've done for themselves as best they could on how to get a better handle on whatever it is that's troubling them at the present moment. Unfortunately, the internet is filled with all kinds of things. Some things there are well worth reading and interesting and maybe apt. And a lot of it is somebody else's crazy opinions and filled with wrong information and unscientific data. Some of it's filled with lies and nonsense. And it's not a reliable way to try and figure out who you are and what should become of you. Fragments of things can reverberate and might be useful, but if this were the only tool that one would use to try and improve life, I would suggest it's not a very good tool, unless you have some kind of coach directing you to various things on the internet. That might be useful, and you have some faith in the wisdom and expertise of the coach, then maybe the internet could be used more thoughtfully. In addition to having a variety of things posted out there that self-exploration is directed towards engaging with, we have a large number of professions all claiming to be the experts that should be consulted if people are having problems of living. The various professions include psychiatry, social work, psychology, and various branches of psychology, clinical psychology, counseling psychology, organizational psychology, marriage and family therapy, and finally, two more, counselors. Counselors are now supposedly psychological counselors, or a name like that. This is a new master's level profession, and it's being licensed in many of the states around the union. And finally, there's a totally unregulated group of people who call themselves life coaches. And they claim that they're the ones that have the greatest and best and most useful wisdom about life challenges, and that they should be the default where people go if people are troubled about their living. How is any consumer to make decisions about what to do about any of that? I know some things that I can say with some surety. This is now relatively outdated, but I think it's a teaching moment anyhow. In the 1980s, the Ohio Psychological Association, I may have presented this in some early lecture that I made about other topics. The Ohio Psychological Association wanted to engage, unusually enough, in a marketing campaign. They wanted to reach out to people, private citizens of the community, through advertising, public relations, practical comments on the air. They weren't sure how, but they wanted to reach out and try and explain what psychologists are to the lay public, and try and increase the number of people who would consider consulting with a psychologist. And I think they felt reasonably idealistic about this. It wasn't only a self-serving thing to get more clients into the offices of psychologists. They didn't believe the lay public understood the benefits that could be gotten, and they were hoping they could make an explanation that would make people wiser about how to get help and what kind of help from whom. So they partnered with the American Psychological Association, because the Ohio Psychological Association does not have a lot of discretionary money to do market research, but APA was deeper pockets, and it seemed like a worthwhile project to the American Psychological Association. And one of the country's best market research firms was hired to find out what people know about psychology, and what would be a good campaign to try and increase the range of knowledge that people had about psychological services. And I'm using that strange term again, psychological services. Turned out that was a really serendipitous decision, because, wonder of wonders, Ohio is typically used as the place that market research is done. The demographics, urban, rural, various ethnic groups, the demographics contained within the boundaries of the state of Ohio roughly approximate the demographics of the entire United States. So people who are bringing out new products, wanted to test public opinion about something, were frequently of a mind to hire a firm that would go into the state of Ohio and use the residents of the state of Ohio as the people to be interviewed or given instruments to. So the study proceeded, and the findings were partly gloomy or grim, at least if you were a psychologist. The vast majority of those who were being interviewed didn't know a damn thing about any differences between labels like psychiatry, social work, psychology, marriage and family therapy, counseling, and so on. If asked what were the differences between people who had those labels or those licenses, the lay public, 80% of the lay public had trouble doing that. The one exception was psychiatry. Psychiatry was known to be a branch of medicine. All the others, people seem to know were not physicians, but what the differences between them or what the focus or emphasis was between the two of them, they were just a mishmash out there, distinct from psychiatrists. What were psychiatrists? If I was a psychiatrist, I wouldn't be happy with what the public was saying was a psychiatrist. A psychiatrist is a doctor who works with crazy people. That's what a psychiatrist is. And psychiatrists are people who lock up crazy people, who give shock treatments to crazy people, and who give pills and medications to crazy people. And the general run of the lay public, if they had to send somebody to a psychiatrist, or if they ever thought of going to a psychiatrist, there was great stigma attached. They would go up the back stairway into the building. They would not want to be seen by their neighbors or their friends having anything to do with psychiatrists. And so I was laughing when I started hearing these results, because I'm not a big fan of psychiatry, and that's a terrible kind of image to carry if you want to market your services to the lay public. And of course, we go around saying over and over again, we're going to treat mental health like any other illness. It should get destigmatized, and on and on and on. And those are very nice sentiments, but they're impractical. And at least as far as a few decades ago, they had not taken hold in the public consciousness. And I would bet you they still haven't taken hold in the public consciousness. The next thing we learned, a bunch of dilemmas were given. You have a relative who seems to be slipping into dementia. Who would you turn to for that? Well, overwhelmingly, the people who would turn to for that was the family physician. Suppose you had a problem with your mate. Suppose you and your mate were beginning to hurt and be troubled about each other, and even one of you had started thinking maybe you need to get a divorce. Would you consult with somebody? Yeah, maybe. Who would you go consult with? Our minister. So the clergy was a scene. The physicians were most frequently mentioned as a place that family or individual or overwhelming difficulties would be taken to discuss. And in second place was to seek some kind of wisdom from a member of the clergy. Going to a professional of the kinds that was on my list, a psychiatrist, a social worker, a psychologist, a marriage and family therapist, a counselor, a life coach. There weren't any life coaches back then, but all the others, to go to see one of those was somewhere only on the radar for about 20% of the population. It tended to be the 20% of the population who had a college degree in the sample that was done. The more education you had, the more likely you were to think of some kind of professional you might consult if you were having a dilemma you weren't able to solve by yourself, other than the family physician, or the minister. Now, there was a differentiation among the intelligent, learned people between psychiatry and all the others. Again, the same stigma attached. Psychiatry was a branch of medicine that dealt with the mentally ill and highly stigmatized. The others were lay people from a point of view of medicine. They had specialized training in various kinds of troubles, and they had expertise that might be helpful to 20% of the population. Who would you pick out of that group? Psychology was in first place. If you were an intelligent, educated person, you knew one thing. The graduate school curriculum for psychologists was 4 or 5 years long. And the graduate school curriculum for all the other people who were competing for places in the sun, that curriculum was 2 or 3 years long before you got finished, got your degree and licensed. You were licensed at the master's level, not at the doctoral level. And there was some cachet about psychologists having a doctor. And so if you're going to see a professional, it was good to see a psychologist, and particularly good because psychologists had the most training, and psychologists did not work with crazy people, put you in hospitals, shock you, or give you medicines. So of course I laugh in bitterness sometimes because much of the leadership of my own profession is insistent that psychologists need to get prescribing privileges. They want to become part of the group that treats the stigmatized and treats the mentally ill, and maybe they're going to ask for shock treatment principle provisions after they get the prescribing privileges. It wouldn't surprise me. They certainly have been asking for hospital privileges. That's been going on for several years now. My colleagues are trying to get on the part of medicine merry-go-round and join the psychiatrists there as kind of junior psychiatrists with some of the same credentials as psychiatry has. And in my presentations about this earlier, I said I think this is both a philosophical, conceptual, and practical terrible mistake. And I hope my profession does not succeed in moving in that direction very fast or very successfully. I know something about the demographics of professions in our field, and psychiatry is already in trouble. They have limited themselves in many ways. It used to be, if you were a psychiatrist, that you were interested in talking to people. You were interested in what's called face-to-face psychotherapy, a verbal interchange between people, trying to influence people with words, imparting knowledge, concepts. But psychiatry has increasingly become highly medicalized. As of the last count of the members of the American Psychiatric Association, the number was down only to 18%. Only 18% of psychiatrists said that they are interested in and still continue to spend time doing and billing for what is called by insurance companies psychotherapy. They spend all their time trying to identify what is the proper medication for the complaints of the person who's come in and what dosage, and then doing medical management, reviewing the dosage, tweaking the dosage, trying a different medication if that medication has not brought some kind of better feeling or better relief. And that's where they have headed. Well, they have made trouble for themselves because the people who manufacture the drugs would like them to be prescribed by as many people as possible. They'll be very happy to help and lobby for psychologists being included among the prescribers. The more people who are able to prescribe, the more likely it is that more pills will be given to a greater number of people. So what has happened now is that psychiatry has no calling that is uniquely theirs. For prescribing psychoactive medications to people who are feeling some kind of unease or distress, 82% of the medication that's designed to give relief for those kinds of conditions are currently being prescribed by everybody but psychiatrists. They're being prescribed by other kinds of physicians, internists, family physicians, OBGYNs, neurologists, on and on and on. There's a large number of other fields that believe they can do this task well, and the drug companies are happy to have them try it and go at it. There's no legal limitation on doing that. And in some states, even pharmacists have been given the right to prescribe certain kinds of psychoactive medications. And in many venues, also nurse practitioners have been allowed to practice the prescribing of various kinds of psychoactive medications. Psychiatry does not have a population anymore that looks to it as the uniquely qualified and best place to go if you want to get some psychoactive medications. So I am not eager about psychology moving in that direction. I would like to keep us differentiated from psychiatry and to develop our own following and our own set of parts of the culture that understands what it is we do and why what we do might be valuable and worth taking a crack at checking in on. So where shall I address this topic now? I told you about the market research and my comments about that. I've indicated to you I'm very unhappy about the pressures from within my own profession and from the pharmaceutical companies to get psychologists to be like junior psychiatrists, to wear white coats and be doctors and give examinations and dose things and do follow-up studies and all the hoo-ha-ha that goes with being a psychiatrist. We want to take that over too. We'll become, I did not mention that psychiatry, because it's lost its market, is slowly becoming extinct. Fewer and fewer residents sign up for residencies in psychiatry now. Psychiatry remains a low status specialty. It's also now, compared to other specialties, it's not as lucrative as other specialties. And the best and brightest in the medical field are not attracted to going into psychiatry. As a matter of fact, in recent years, the various residency programs around the country that have always been uniquely focused on the training of psychiatrists are having trouble filling their quotas. There are just not enough Americans coming out of medical school, getting their MD degrees, wanting specialized training in psychiatry to take care of the slots and the needs that those places have. So more and more, those residencies are being thrown open to people from foreign countries if they speak English. The Canadians come here for psychiatric training. Brits come here for psychiatric training. Lots of people come from India for psychiatric training. Some of them stay here afterwards. A lot of them go back to their countries of origin. I am thinking before the century's over, there may not be even a lot of those residencies anymore. There may be only maybe a few hundred, maybe small number in the low thousands of psychiatrists left in the country who identify and have a residency in psychiatry. And my guess is they'll be primarily connected with medical schools. They'll be trying to train other people, and they'll be doing research. They aren't going to be spending a lot of time relating to the public and trying to help the public directly. But I'll see if my projection is correct or not. I'm only 91 now. I'll see what happens when I'm coming up on the turn of the 22nd century. Maybe my answers will come to me at that point. So let me back up and start with something simple. Now I'll talk as an anthropologist. Every culture has always identified as a useful thing a cadre of people who are designated with some label that says that they are the tribal elders. Tribes need elders. Life is complex. Life is disappointing. Life defeats us for time. Life throws challenges that we can't meet sometimes. And every culture, no matter how primitive it is, and that's a pejorative term, primitive cultures, no matter how long it's been around, for how many millennia, every culture has designated some people and tried to figure out what their background should be in order to qualify for the post. Some people have been credited as tribal elders. And these are the people that the flocks of the multitude should go call on if they have a dilemma and don't know how to deal with it. And yes, go consult one of the tribal elders. In most places, there is an overlap, like is still going on in the farmlands of Ohio. The tribal elder you consult is also the religious person who connects you with the spiritual world. But in other cultures, it was a secular office to be a tribal elder. It was granted to people who demonstrated in tribal councils and in other ways. They had a certain point of view, a certain contribution they could make to the debates that were going on that seemed particularly facilitative. And so after a while, they would be recognized and honored, and they would be called the tribal elders and join the group of people who at other times would see them in private and lay out what the dilemmas were and seek counsel about what should be done. I think my own profession, the profession of psychology, in its parts that are sitting, like myself, are sitting in offices waiting for people to come in, are best thought of as tribal elders. Most of us are secular. We're not selling some kind of religious observances as the way out of whatever are the pain dilemmas that our clients find ourselves in. But there are some theological seminaries in our country that have doctoral programs in psychology, and they want to try and train some of us, some subset of us, who are joined as licensed psychologists to attack their issues with a combination of psychological wisdom and theological sophistication. I worry about that. I don't know if we're serving our clients as well as we could if we continue to allow that to go on. But freedom of choice laws and First Amendment rights and freedom of religious principles in the Constitution probably make it impossible for the rest of us who are suspicious of and don't think that theological psychologists are a good way for the profession to proceed. I don't think we can do anything about it, and we will just have to be there and continue our own work. That is probably a small minority of the people who are licensed as psychologists. I would guess somewhere between 10 and 15% of us who are out there trying to serve the public have arrived at that destination by enrolling in a program in a theological seminary that has been a mixture of psychological wisdom and the connections between certain kinds of psychological wisdom and theological wisdom of the kind that is being embraced in that particular theological seminary. I feel sorry for the public. Yeah, wherever I turn, there are complications, unclarities, overlapping interests, competing points of view. It's very hard. Oh, I'm jumping ahead to one of my notes. What the work is not, in spite of pressures to push the work there, the work is not like changing the oil on a car. If your oil needs to be changed on a car, you know who the specialist is. You go to the mechanic, and there is a protocol for how it is that the oil is to be changed, where the plug is that needs to be removed, the particular piece of equipment it has to be drained into so it doesn't contaminate the environment, where to dispose of the waste of the oil, how to tighten with how many torque pressure the little nut that's on the drain thing should be adjusted to, where the filler pipe is to pour more oil into, to get oil of a certain grade and kind and density, for depending on the model of the car. Pour it into the thing, put the cap back on that place where the oil pipe is, and change the sticker on the door to reflect when the next oil change needs to be made. It's a fairly simple and uniform set of rituals that has to be gone through. Ditto, if you want to go over in the medical realm, if somebody comes in with and their appendix is just burst, it's fairly simple to know what to do. You rush them to the OR, you put them under with a general anesthetic, you check their vital signs to make sure that they're surviving okay. You make a curving wound around a certain point on the abdomen and lay back the layers of tissue until you get to where the burst appendix is. You snip off the remainder, you pull out the pieces of burst appendix, you do a lavage, a washing out with antibiotic of the wound cavity you've created, because that stuff is full of bacteria that's leaked into the abdomen. You could die from sepsis from it. So you lavage it, then you start closing the wound in a certain way with certain layers, with certain kinds of clamps or sutures. And then you bring the person out of the anesthetic, you give them some fluid, and you put them on a heavy dose of antibiotics as a follow-up, and you bring them back in 2 or 3 days and you take out the sutures. It's one after another, after another, after another. And other than slight changes in the biology of a particular person, the protocol for doing it, there's no argument about it. It's very straightforward. It's a bunch of defined steps. There is pressure in our field, in the field of people who are the elders, or trying to be the elders, to try to arrive at uniform conclusions that are moving in that direction. Somebody comes in and says they have they're very, very depressed. So you do some kind of assessment of what they're depressed about, and then there is a medicine you should be giving them, and then there are certain topics you need to talk to them about. You need to do a suicide assessment to see how dangerous they are. You need to check on whether there's a big stressor in their life, or are they being sued? Are they under indictment and a criminal charge? Has somebody precious to them died? You try and find out what the stressor is, and then work on having them adapt to the stressor. And you try to reduce the intensity of the stressor, and you may give them cognitive behavioral exercises to do, or a workbook, depressive workbook to work their way through, that gives them counsel about how to contend with their depression. But it's ritualized and stereotyped, and you do the same thing with anybody who comes in and says that they're depressed. The movement in the field is to try to make that uniform. That is being driven by social policy wonks, and it's being driven by the people who do research in one or another of the helping profession. It's being pushed by the federal government, who wants to tie reimbursement campaigns to having something that they have some reason to believe works. So we're being under pressure more and more to develop a unified way of approaching anything. And each particular thing that is complained about by somebody coming into the office, there will be a manual for us to look at about how to go about the treatment of that. And from the first visit, we'll start planning what the subsequent visits are going to consist of, what the topics of conversation are going to be, what kinds of adjunct materials we're going to use from workbooks or from videos we want our clients to watch. And we're going to become robotized as best as the powers behind us can push us in those directions. And that's true for all the other helping professions, for those who say they're social workers, for those who are marriage and family therapists, for counselors. All of us are being pushed by these forces. The only ones free of them right now are the people who call themselves life coaches. they do not see themselves as doing anything analogous to some branch of what physicians do, or car mechanics do, where there are protocols for things, or plumbers. Plumbers have certain rituals they have to follow depending on what the particular diagnosis is of what the problem is. There is a right way and a wrong way to address a plumbing issue too. There is no right, that's the problem. There's no right way or wrong way to address the issue of human experience, confusion, and or distress. Ah. Okay, I have, before I get to that, I took a pause. There's a book that one of our colleagues wrote, and it's quite lovely. And the book is titled, "The Therapy is the Therapist." Each of us, each of us who meets with our clients, as I said at the beginning of this, is an idiosyncratic entity. I could do an easy experiment. I could give a mythical or a real tape recording of an initial session with a client, and I could give it to 20 people who are my colleagues. And I can say, take a look at this. What more would you like to know that isn't contained? Because not everything comes up in the 50 minutes of the first visit. What would be your plan for the next visit? What would you want to do? And could you give a kind of overarching summary of how you think the work with this particular client would proceed, and how would you shape it and try and steer it? What would you be doing with the client? Because after all, you're the expert and the client is coming to you for your wisdom and expertise. And I promise you, if I gave that to 20 different colleagues, there'd be practically no overlap in the kinds of answers I would get, and the kind of data they would generate from me. What else would they want to know about? A, what would they do in the next session? B, and then what would be their longer term plan for items to be taken up and addressed? I really should do this research. I am quite certain about how idiosyncratic we are. I'm worried that my colleagues, if I ask them to do that, will start thinking about what should I put here, as if there are some standards out there that exist that they've been taught in some continuing education course, or when they were in graduate school, or some particular internship they were in for a while. What the hell would they expect me there? I'm being the same thing is being asked me. What's my treatment plan? God damn it, what should I put here? And they would put horseshit there, would have no connection whatsoever to what would actually take place in their sessions. But they would be afraid to be idiosyncratic or to say things that didn't come out of some source that they thought was the right source it should come out of. All right. So I apologize for cursing. Let me go on. I have 4 cases to illustrate my point. One was a case that Aaron and Scott were privy to yesterday too. One of the members of our group presented a case that still has my head spinning and myself shaking my head. And there are ethnic issues involved in this case too. It isn't just an ordinary white bread Protestant American couple that this relates to. This is an Israeli couple, and they were born and grew up in Israel and moved to the United States after they did their military service from 18 to 20. They decided to emigrate to the United States, but up until then they had been Israelis, and they had gotten quite smitten with each other in high school, and they actually married in late teenage years, just before they went off to the army. They got married to each other, and they were each other's beloved and best friends. They came to the United States. He went into the construction business. Neither of them had any green cards, but he just opened a construction business because he knew something about it, and hired workers and got things moving, and is still doing construction business. And to this day, neither of them have any kind of green card. So early in their being in the United States, they understood what the importance of a green card was. And now it begins to get stranger and stranger. One of the tools available to somebody who's here on a visitor's visa or a student visa or anything that isn't permanent and doesn't convey a green card can get a green card by marrying an American citizen. That's one of the options open. So they started talking to each other about maybe what they needed to do was to get a divorce, a legal American divorce from each other, which would allow them to get another legal divorce, marriage to some other person. And then each of them, if they married some other person, could get a green card. They talked to various lawyers who agreed that yes, this was possible theoretically, but it was not a smart move and not a good way to go. And they could get in trouble if this scheming was found out that the second marriage is that the first marriage was first divorce was a pretense, and the second marriages were pretense too. There was no real sentiment or no real connection with the people that they were marrying, and the IRS has a way of following up on these kinds of worries and finding people out and making life hard for them, and so it was not recommended. After a while, the wife decided she was going to do it anyhow, and she went to court over her husband's objections, and she divorced him. So now they were legally divorced, and he kept reminding her, well, you may be legally divorced, but you are not religiously divorced. There is a marriage contract that's drawn up in Hebrew by a rabbi if you get a Jewish wedding, and that contract remains in force unless you petition a rabbi to void the contract and to agree to allow you to be religiously divorced too. And neither one of them had ever done that. So here we are many years later. The kids are, I think they're just about grown up already. And there's still a religiously legal Israeli divorce in place, but the two are divorced as American residents. There's no marriage between them. The wife subsequently, once she got the American divorce, she started to pull out of her role as mother and house partner of the father. She started to take little vacations by herself. She started to spend time apart from the family with other friends that she was developing in her new life in America. For actually, this was shocking to me, for actually 3 years, she announced to her husband and children that she was going to live up in the Monterey Bay area. She was renting a house up there, and she was going to stay up there. And if they wanted to see her, they could come up for weekends. And she maintained the separation from the family in that way for 3 years. And she started dating men, ostensibly for the purpose of finding somebody who was interested in taking on the challenge of marrying her and allowing her to get a green card. At some point, the trip up north, she liquidated it. And one of the things that's obvious about this couple, as I heard from my colleague, is they don't talk to each other about things that matter. It's totally unclear to the husband why she went, how she lived up there. Totally unclear. And for some reason, he's never pressed her about this, why she made the decision to return. And then he never knew where she was headed, because suddenly she announces about 6 months ago, I think it was, I'm not sure my timing is quite correct, about 6 months ago, that she had found the next husband and she was going to get married. She had already planned the wedding and the wedding date, and her boys were invited to come attend the wedding. They hadn't even met the man who was going to be their stepfamily under American law. But she went ahead and now she is legally married to somebody else. I assume she's starting to process her uh, green card visa now. The husband is thrown for a loop and at a loss and confused and does not know how to proceed. So I sat there in the room and various things were explored by one or another of my colleagues, and that's what I love. Everybody was picking up something different about this story. It's a story rich with uncertainties and crazinesses and unheard of behaviors and bad behavior and who the hell's the client? The kids must be really troubled about the craziness they're living through. The father is certainly upset. He's not sure how to proceed. What the hell is the woman doing? Does she need some help? So we were going round and round with different kinds of theories and different suggestions. Our colleague was listening. She found much of what we said potentially useful as things to explore and possible ways to help. And I did something I typically do because it's one of the tools that I feel some kindred with, kind of kindred connection to, and it's important to me and tends to be something I go visit no matter who the client is and what's going on. It's a set of tools that I find useful or at least potentially useful. And that is, I think about human development as it's been described by various specialists. What are the stages of development we go through over the transit from the time we're born until when we die? And the last one, of course, is trying to make some accommodation to the fact that death is coming. But there are a variety of challenges and turbulences that happen simply because we're like snakes and we shed our skins periodically. We move on through the adaptation and the importance of certain things that are part of this developmental stage. Other things start to become more important and those things become less important. And I think about the lives I'm seeing in my office with those perspectives in mind. So there's an individual lifespan and families are like individuals. They go through their own times of twisting and turning, and the family will get in trouble if the family structure doesn't change periodically to make room for the new developments that are happening in the family. So these are lenses and glasses. I'm looking at everything I'm listening to. And whenever I hear one of my colleagues making a presentation in our group too, those are lenses I'm looking through. So from my perspective, the most driving force in this terrible story I was hearing was a story of unmet developmental needs. The woman was demonstrating that she couldn't skip over something. She went from high school, being in love with somebody, beginning to explore what it is to be erotically connected with somebody, what the meaning of love is, what's infatuation, what's love, how do I manage a close relationship. She was at an age where she was beginning to, rightfully so, to confront those issues. They were boiling in her, and her solution to the problem was to get married. She decided already who was going to be her life partner based on little or no experience. She had no training or talent about how to manage a relationship. She didn't have a bunch of other experiences to compare and contrast the experience with her childhood boyfriend with, and to learn from a variety of different kinds of engagements she might have experienced. And I always worry when that experimentation has not gone on. I think typically somewhere in one's 30s, if one's tried to be devotedly domestic and carry out those commitments, it doesn't work. And there's a restlessness that starts boiling up inside. And boy, was she restless. She left home for a while, like a teenage kid getting into their 20s. She left home and came back to home again. She tried on various relationships. She was having with a vengeance what she should have been having in her late teens and her 20s and never had. And I counseled my colleague. I was very uncertain and very pessimistic that she would decide to rejoin her family and live with her husband anymore. At some point, if he didn't do it, she would start demanding she would start instructing him. She was going to a rabbi to get a Jewish divorce too. she would become the leading actor, even though in her culture, men are supposed to lead and women are supposed to follow. Another thing she may do is just torture him endlessly, so it's unbearable to him, and he'll be the one that will finally close out the relationship, and then she'll be free to finish her adolescence. I say I'm pessimistic because very few girls fall in love with daddy and grow up and marry daddy. That just doesn't happen. Yeah, I think if the laws weren't different, maybe once in a while it would happen, but that's not what the great mass of young people do. They flirt with daddy some and they grow up and they try on other people, and then eventually they pick somebody who's not in a parental role. But she bonded with him and put him in the role of the caretaking father, since her own father was away in Israel, and then outgrow having a man in that role and moved on. That was my formulation, and I don't know other colleagues who do this. That formulation may be unique to me. I may be the only one who picks up that tool very often and pulls it out when I'm confused about what to do with clients. So I wanted to bring that up, not because it was only the case that was highly idiosyncratic and interesting in crazy ways. Myself as a therapist was highly idiosyncratic. I wasn't doing or focusing on any of the kinds of things my colleagues were bringing up, and talking to the one whose case it was yesterday. And that's fine. One of the good things about being in group is that there's a richness of possibility that we offer to each other, and each of us is different, and that's okay. Unfortunately, one of the consequences of what I'm saying is the important thing in whether the care we give might be useful is based in large part on the idiosyncrasies and the chemistry that flows between the therapist and the client. It's not because of the specific wisdom we have or don't have, or some resource that we can direct them to watch online, or some manual we'll give them to fill out. Those things can help, but the real driving force is, it's almost as if marriages succeed because the people are attuned to each other in some way, and there is a good chemistry that they make together. That has to be somewhere in the mix, or it's not going to work. So I don't know what to help anybody who comes to me and says, should I see so-and-so? I have a possible therapist referral. What should I do with? I always encourage them, go have the experience being with that therapist. All right, let me pass on to, my God, I didn't even know that this would take more than 10 minutes, and I've almost used up my time. Let me go on to the next case of mine. Oh, this is a case of mine. That was a case I was consulting on. This case of mine, he has come back now after I saw him maybe for 6 months, 8 months, it's about 7 years ago. I saw him for about 8 months. He was having woman trouble, and he was in his early 40s and thought that maybe it was time for him to quit flirting so much, to quit having one night stands, to quit enjoying the hunt, to quit having recreational sex. Maybe he ought to take somebody seriously and begin to see if there was anybody who could be an ongoing partner for him. And we worked about that, and he started spending more than 1 or 2 visits with somebody. If she had any nice characteristics, he was willing to spend more time with her to see if some kind of sparks could happen. In the aftermath of meeting her, he didn't have to be crazy infatuated on the get-go. Maybe he could just spend time with somebody who seemed like a good person to have in his life, and learn to enjoy that and see where it led him. And he was doing better. He was actually going steady with somebody at that point, and he said goodbye to me. Well, he came back, and he did fulfill that prophecy. He is now living with somebody, and he's moved back to Los Angeles, so that's nice too. And they are engaged. He wanted to talk to me about his relationship. He wanted to make sure that he had my blessing, that I thought maybe he had done a good thing. And by the way, from everything he said about the woman who's now his possible partner in life, she sounds like a very good match for him, and they don't have a lot of trouble with each other. The chemistry is quite good. She's even working in his business and helping to coach him and soothe him in the workplace. And she's doing very good work for him as well as being a potential mate. And he's really excited. He thinks he's getting ready to tell the world that he gave her an engagement ring. And he's getting ready to move to the next stage and start planning what has meaning in terms of a wedding. What kind of ceremony would they like? Do they want any? Do they want to elope? Where do they want to go? And beyond that, there is the beginning, just the beginning of, is he going to become a father? That's in the background, one step at a time. Let him get married and I'll address that with more intensity. So he said, you know what? I guess it's been good checking in with you. I don't know if there's anything else that we need to talk about, he said, except my business is driving me crazy. So I said, okay, I'll listen. Why don't we talk about that? You telling me your business is driving crazy? What's going on? He said, I can't seem to assemble a work staff that is doing what I'm trying to get them to do. I said, as I understand that you're still in the same business that you were running in New York. You just moved the headquarters, pulled out of the structure with your partners, are doing this by your own, but doing it here in Los Angeles. Yeah, that's right. I said, you are I don't know what words to put on it. He is a lawyer placement service. He helps lawyers leave the firms they're in, and he finds another firm for them to go to, and he makes the match with the new firm, and he gets a very big commission for this kind of work. And he specializes in not just any lawyers, he specializes in firm partners. He moves them from being a partner in a firm that they're unhappy with to getting a partnership typically in a firm that is a much better fit for them. And he's very good at the work. He says, I like doing this work, but now I am the owner of a separate business. This is my business, and I have to have employees helping me. So I have to spend a lot of time managing employees, and I'm no good at it. He says, they annoy me, I lose my temper. And I said, well, maybe I could be of some help to you. So all of a sudden, my role with him has changed. And I feel comfortable with the change. I am really becoming an organizational consultant to him. He does not know how to structure his organization. He does not know how to talk to a supervisee who needs supervision. He does not know how to run a group meeting of his employees when he wants to change policy or get their feedback about something. He is terrible at all of that. It's a good example of the Peter principle. He's moved up to his level of incompetence. He himself, placing lawyers, has an annual income of about $800,000 a year. He believes that he could teach those who are now trying to learn from him to be as effective as him, that the market is large enough that they could do it too. And he is frustrated that he's having trouble. They're not putting out, they're not working, they're engaged in petty gossip behind each other's back. He has a million complaints. So I am now going to systematically supervise him. He does his training sessions by Zoom. I may even be joining some of his training sessions to watch what the hell he's doing and what's causing the trouble. And suddenly my assignment to be a good elder to him is far away from the kinds of things they started with. It's far away from how do I build a close and sustaining person, a woman, to be my partner in my personal life, is how do I manage my chaos in my firm? And I'm not going to send him off to a consultant. I once had to be a manager of a multi-million-dollar enterprise. I know something about this. I've had other clients who have been in executive positions. I know what they've struggled with. I feel like I do have enough expertise to be a tribal elder about this topic as well as about anything else that we've talked about so far. And by the way, I've had one session with him, giving him some beginning ideas of how to restructure things, and he's thrilled. He's saying to me, why didn't I think of doing this years ago with you? So he likes the kind of feedback he's getting from me, and I'm happy to continue doing it. I see that I'm coming up on time. I need to make, I'll find a pen. Where the hell's a pen? It doesn't matter. I'll stop here and I'll pick up at this point next week. So the floor is open. Who has anything to say?
Well, I definitely agree with the idea that each therapist is kind of the therapy. You know, I've experienced that myself, and I've seen that with a lot of in the group when we all talk about the different cases and how we all have kind of a slightly different slice on
Yeah.
how to work with within, and it's very idiosyncratic. It comes a lot from our own personal experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When you were talking about that, Arthur, I was reminded of a time when I was a oral examiner
Oh,
for
yeah.
the licensing board, and I
Oh,
would
yeah.
do that, every year. Actually, I think we had our duties twice a year, and we would evaluate candidates
Yep.
who had completed their written part of the exam, and they were being questioned and provided with a vignette about
Yeah, we had dilemmas we would give them. Here is the story of a client. What would you do?
Right, and there was kind of like specific questions, and there was protocols and answers. But I found myself really thinking about kind of like, well, what kind of a psychologist would this person be, and what kind of a clinician, and are they a good one? And I would be thinking about, are they caring, are they competent, and are they responsible?
Yeah.
And if they met that type of criteria and also answered the questions that we had on the exam fairly well, and they didn't make any egregious mistakes, then they were passed.
Yeah.
Very
But
fair.
the mindset of the board of psychology was that there was a set of correct answers they should be giving.
To a certain extent, but
Yeah.
in some ways, as an examiner, in some ways, I wanted to make sure, in some ways, well, are we going to set this person loose in the in the public, and we want to make sure, in some ways, that they're not going to do any harm, and that they're going to conceivably do some good.
Yeah, maybe I was unfair in that sour comment about the board of psychology. As I think back on it, I will give them a certain due. It wasn't necessarily that they wanted to see some robotic-like right answers given to those questions. They wanted to make sure, in response to the dilemmas we're asking the candidates about, that the candidate didn't come up with some craziness that would have been very destructive for the consumer.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Oh, thank you. Uh, Early in my practice, when I joined the group practice that I was a member of, that hired me out of graduate school, we had somebody left subsequently, and we had an empty office, so we were interviewing people to join the group and take over the empty office we had. And we hired somebody who was the peer of my older associates. He was probably about 15 years out of graduate school by that point. May have been in his late 30s, early 40s. And he seemed pleasant enough, and he seemed like a very kind person. But he was in the grip of the madness of the 1960s back then. And he had a belief that it should all hang out. People should be very genuine and authentic and talk about everything and explore everything with each other. And it was particularly important that that happen in the therapeutic relationship, that there be an authentic and free-flowing relationship between the therapist and the client. So as part of his practice, he would tell his clients that he was going to take off all his clothing and he was going to sit naked in his chair. And they should take off all their clothing and sit naked in their chair too, because that way they will be totally there and available and transparent. And that was the way that therapy should happen. What are you laughing about?
I think it's fabulous. I think he's onto something. I think he was a man before his time.
It took us a while to figure out without yelling at him or just telling him to get out of here, we could work our way out. I think we finally just said his beliefs didn't feel good to us. He may be right and we may be wrong, but we just weren't comfortable. And he wasn't a good fit for us. And he could stay for a while until he found some other place to locate. But it would be best if we went our separate ways.
And who is managing the malpractice premiums?
Probably weren't any.
I don't think we even had malpractice insurance. We weren't even licensed yet then.
Exactly. Yeah.
All right. So thank you for listening. I'll pick up at that point next week. I have more to say.
Okay.
2 weeks.
all right.
2
Oh,
weeks.
2 weeks.
2
That's
weeks,
right.
yes,
Yeah.
yeah, I will not be here. Okay.
All right.
All right,
Bye.
be well. Bye
See
now.
you guys. Bye.